Online Romanian Military Conference 2021. I'm Colonel Mircea Barac, Editor-in-Chief Romanian Military Thinking magazine, edited by the Defense Staff and your host for this event. For the smooth running of the debate, I would like to highlight a few organizational issues. From a technical point of view, speakers and moderators will have access to the video camera and microphone options related to the application. The audience will have access only to the listening option. For the Q&A section within the panels, I will kindly ask the participants to send the questions in writing in the public chat section and to mention to whom they address the questions. Education, main vector of understanding and promoting the security culture, it's a panel chaired by the Air Flotilla General Eugen MAVRIT. Brigadier General Eugen MAVRIT has been Chief of the Training and Doctrine Directorate since February 2021. His previous position include Commander of the National Military Command Center, Head of Strategies and Planning Department, and Head of International Organization Department, both within the Strategic Planning Directorate. He has a PhD in military studies regarding the dynamics of the national security in the circumstances of the Romanian Armed Force transformation. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Colonel Barac. Thank you very much, and congratulations for organizing this conference. I'll say the same, dear guests, dear followers, good morning. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to online session of the panel here at the Romanian Military Thinking Journals Conference 2021. The conference, our panel is aimed at exploring the education as main vector in achieving security culture. Today, our panel consists of 5 panelists. There will be speeches and presentations delivered approximately 10 to 15 minutes each. The panelists and their topics will be introduced before each presentation. Although you will be given the opportunity to learn about their expertise, I would like to say from the very beginning that we are privileged to have today in our panel distinguished guests who are widely recognized for their performance in the education process. As it was mentioned, in order to encourage discussions, obtain insights, and create opportunities for as many participants as possible, there will be questions from both the moderator and online followers. Only one question per follower rule will be applied. Me and the panelists, we will try to respond in the same manner, being short and trying to address all questions. Before to start our panel, I would like to make some remarks regarding our topic today. Military education is a complex field. At a time when the armed forces insist on the fact that uncertainty it is dominant feature of future operations, and the security environment is becoming increasingly complex and unpredictable, education is, in the true sense of the word, has never been more important than it is today to the military. The new challenges posed by technologies such as artificial intelligence or quantum technology can change the nature of war in unpredictable ways. Also, the demographic and climate changes are likely to trigger new types of conflicts which can employ advanced communications and very new technologies. Whether we accept that these challenges have an unprecedented scope or not, it seems logical to say that the military men must be prepared to deal with uncertainty, especially as they climb the career ladder towards positions requiring strategic responsibilities in making decisions. Military education can play a critical role in spreading cultural values and traditions related to national security. The concept of human capital entails that the individuals bring value to society and link the educational progress to the culture and economic development, which when applied at the level of a region should also contribute to a greater transnational security. The quality education to be provided by the military education system must be based on innovation and diversification, be promoted by academics, educational leaders, respect and be based on institutional autonomy, be guided through dialogue and partnership towards results, ensure the participation of all internal and external education actors, value that human resources and understand that interdependence between the institutions and the beneficiaries who expect a highly professional human resources which is adapted to the future needs of the defense, intelligence, public order, and national security structure. This debate aims to provide an insight in how military education systems are linked to the concept of security. During the debate, participants will share their views on key concepts related to impact of military education on security and conflict, such as the educational-related security issue, the concept of human capital as a socio-cultural relationship between education and security or regional conflicts, the nature of education related transnational threats, the implications of education for the stability of the security environment, the desirable educational curriculum in the modern military education system. Gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, our first panelist is Mr. Stefan MARIANO, who will reveal us what professional military education includes. He is Dean and Deputy Commander, NATO Defense College in Rome, Italy. Previously, he served as the Associate Dean of Outreach and Research at the National Defense University National War College. He directed the Strategies and Initiatives Group for Secretary of the Army and was an inaugural member of the Chief of Staff of the Army Strategic Studies Group. He also served as the first Director of Strategic Plans, Policies and Assessment for U.S. Army Africa. His deployment experience includes services as Deputy Director of Strategy, Plans and Assessment at the Multinational Security Transition Command Iraq and in Afghanistan as the military advisor to NATO's senior civilian representative. He also served as Strategic Plans and Policy Officer and International Military Staff at NATO HQ and at the US UCOM in Stuttgart, Germany. He taught military strategy and comparative military systems at the U.S. Military Academy, West Point, New York, as well as politics and U.S. foreign policy at the Royal Military College of Canada. Sir, the floor is yours.
Very good. Thank you very much, General. Hopefully everyone can hear me and see me okay. It's a real pleasure. Great. Thank you very much. And happy Bowtie Friday here from Rome. And thank you, General, for the kind introduction and for the invitation, and to the 30 or so of you online during the session. It's a pleasure to be here. I think the title of this, about the main vectors of understanding and promoting a security culture, are appropriate. And I think that some of the other speakers will talk about some of the emerging and disruptive technology aspects, or maybe even other drivers of change like climate change. And perhaps some of the speakers will talk about regional challenges with China or Russia or the Middle East as these potential vectors. But I would like to talk about 5 other vectors that promote security culture, or at least are important in security culture. First, I'll mention the importance of self-education and experience as an important aspect. of the education process. So that's a formal education that we do in our colleges, yes, but also the informal part that happens outside. Second, I'll talk a little bit about the difference between education and training. Third, I'll talk about the need for multidisciplinary studies. I recall as a cadet, I learned the phrase about the military art and science, and that's a phrase that stuck with me. Fourth, I'll talk about the challenges of specialization in education, particularly in security studies these days. And fifth, I'll briefly talk about the importance of relationships in promoting a security culture. So first, on professional military education, I think, as the General mentioned, it is an important part of human capital development. And I think Allied Command Transformation is making an attempt to promote this idea throughout the Alliance. But there's two other parts of development and human capital that are important, and that's self-development and then our assignments and our experience. I'm not sure about the other systems in NATO, but in the US system, officers spend about 1/3 of their career in education, which is incredible compared to other professions. And that's an important attribute that the military profession has. But today there's so much information that's available online, and the younger generations have so much access to information. They're doing so much self-education, and things like massive online open courses or MOOCs are really changing the way that people learn and the way that they live their lives. Actually, I just watched a video the other day that taught me how to change a light bulb in my very complicated car, and I couldn't figure it out myself. I went on YouTube, watched 2 different videos, and within 15 minutes, I was able to change the light bulb. But you can find courses on almost anything, whether it's a lecture on Western civilizations or lectures on how to change a light bulb. And for certain types of learning, that's just fine. But you know, I couldn't ask the question online watching the YouTube video. I couldn't ask the person the question, but in other forum online and technologies, you're able to interact. The bottom line there is it means that the role of educators are changing today because there is so much self-learning that can happen outside the classroom. So teachers have changed their role from the sage on the stage, is the phrase that's frequently used, to some other role that's either a coach in the classroom or outside the classroom, or in some ways even the fact checker, the verifier of truth that students might find out in open sources where we know there's so much misinformation. So the teacher's role is connected not only from the classroom to that self-learning that happens outside. And then a final note there on experience. You know, I've been talking to some people, we've been looking to hire people. I've been on hiring panels recently. And it's amazing when you're looking for all the qualifications that we want in a person and we go to hire them. It's a reality that there's a certain amount of time that it takes to develop the experiences that we want. For example, a faculty advisor here at the NATO Defense College, we want them to have NATO experience at the strategic level. We want them to have teaching experience at the strategic level or at a high level. And it just takes time and experience to develop those kind of skills. So these are 3 important pillars, let's say, of a human capital development system. Okay, next, and briefly, just a word about the difference between training and education. I think most of us in this session are probably familiar with this difference, but it's worth just reminding ourselves that there is a difference between training and education. Some say training is teaching people what to think, and education is teaching them how to think. And I think that's a fairly good and quick way to think about it. But as mentioned earlier, there's a lot of change in the environment today, particularly when it comes to technology. And so how we think about educating ourselves on technology and training ourselves for technology probably is worth thinking about. Of course, you know, I'm a Star Wars fan. My kids are too. And when I think about things like the Clone Wars, and I think about how interchangeable those clones are in future war or in that science fiction kind of warfare, I think it's a commentary on some people's views of the way that armies operate today, as if every soldier is a robot in some sort of interchangeable way, and they can be trained to do the job. And if one clone is wiped out, the next one can take the spot and is trained to repeat the process and knows the drill and can fill in the gap. And that is a pretty extreme way to think about training. But, you know, there's another way to think about education in the same film, and that's the Jedis and the way that they approach problems. They're critical thinkers, they come up with creative solutions, and they're clearly not robots. In the future, that may not be such an easy distinction to make between training and education as it comes to technology, but that really leads to a third point. And a fourth point, which are multidisciplinarity of professional military education is the third point. You know, most of us that were in the military were raised on a steady stream of military history or philosophers, Sun Tzu or Thucydides or Clausewitz. We studied history as a way of studying the contemporary challenges that military faces. We looked for enduring challenges and we tried to apply them to our current situation and then our future situation. And that's absolutely right. We should study history. We have a lot to learn. But what's coming now is that maybe we need other sorts of skills, or maybe it's always been there. And this is back to my comment about military art and science. I'm an American. You heard that I used to teach at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, and in 1802, that school was founded as an engineering school. And it was really kind of in the U.S., the STEM 1.0, the Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math initiative in its origins. And a lot of people credit that kind of education, science, technology, engineering, and math to the foundations of the United States. And I think there is something to that. It wasn't just a study of military history, it was a study of science. And of course, we see that again in the World War II era, just before and during and after, how important science was to the waging of warfare. And we know the technologies that came out of that period, nuclear weapons being the most prominent example. But this is our 70th year here at the college. You can see the little anniversary logo back there. We're celebrating General Eisenhower as our founder. And General Eisenhower had to deal with a thing or two about science as well. He was the president during the Sputnik moment, was the president when a U-2 spy plane was shot down. So we see this interaction between technology and security, of course, and our role as educators is obviously pretty important in that, balancing hard sciences and soft sciences. So that's the third point. The fourth point is really about specialization, and it flows from this multidisciplinary approach. As mentioned, when it comes to the emerging and disruptive technologies, it's incredible to see the amount of specificity that's going on and the amount of specialization that people need in these technologically based systems. But we're also seeing on the flip side of globalization, which is an intense desire for knowledge, local knowledge, and detailed understanding of cultures and of religions and of other types of knowledge that aren't necessarily related to soft science or to hard science. So this combination between a hard science and soft science is a challenge. How do you balance the need for increasing specialized knowledge with the need to teach it all in a 6-month or 1-year period at a war college or a staff college? So I think the emphasis there is really to focus on teaching leaders how to lead people that are specialists, rather than to turn people into specialists. You know, it's interesting, part of my PhD work, I looked at 40 years of academic curriculum at the Army War College in the United States. And there was a period in the late 70s where every officer took a computer science class learning Fortran or COBOL or some language. IBM punch cards was another part of the program. Well, that didn't last very long because I think the leaders realized that that was almost a useless effort to try and teach colonels that level of detail during their war college year. And gradually the shift was to teaching leaders how to manage scientists or lead scientists, particularly in their art. But one thing that was common throughout all of that, whether it was hard science or soft science, whether it was specialization or generalization, was a certain sort of passion for lifelong learning in the area of your study. In fact, Clausewitz talked about the role of passion, but more contemporarily, Walter Isaacson in his book called The Innovators found a common theme when looking at people like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and other now famous entrepreneurs that brought us the big tech industries. One of their common traits was passion, a passion for what they did, and interestingly enough, the importance of relationships, and that's my last point. All this stuff, study of technology and its role in professional military education is important, but it also highlights the need for acquiring knowledge, whether it's hard science or soft science, with the importance of acquiring relationships. Part of all of our professional military education models really depend on building relationships. In the US, we use a term called acculturation, and that's really to take students out of their services, out of the Navy or the Air Force or the Army, and give them a joint acculturation. That's one of the primary goals of a professional military education at the joint level. And here at the NATO Defense College, we take that idea beyond the services and into this idea of a NATO culture of multinational cooperation within the alliance. And so that's really my fifth point. I was also recalling and preparing an article during the Arab Spring that came out in the New York Times. It was called When Armies Decide. When Armies Decide. And the point of the article was that as the Arab Spring was taking place and there were riots in the streets and uprisings everywhere, that it was the relationships between many of the military leaders in the West and with Arab countries that kept the armies in the barracks. For example, in Egypt, in Tahrir Square, a few phone calls kept the armies in the barracks and prevented the Egyptian generals from not using military force on the rioters in Tahrir Square and to let that remain a police issue. So in conclusion, I would just encourage us all to think about these multiple vectors. And I think this last example I gave is a great example of how relationships and the other vectors can promote a security culture. We need to think about global and regional and even local challenges, as well as thematic drivers of international, of change in the international environment. But we need to think along these other vectors like relationships, specialization, multidisciplinary approaches, the differences between training and education, and finally, the importance of self-development in building a security culture. It's been an honor to participate. Let me thank the organizers, and I'd also especially like to thank and recognize my friend, Brigadier PLETCAN, who I think is going to be up next or after Dirk, also another colleague, so it's great to see everybody. Thanks for allowing me to join in, and I look forward to hearing the other presentations and having a little Q&A. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Stefan, and for sharing with us your views. Sure, I would like to highlight at least two things you mentioned. What important is to share the security culture with youngers. For what important is security culture for the young generation, and also how difficult is the education, which teach us how to think the difference between training and education. Really, it's an important thing. Okay, thank you once again. For sure that your views will generate interesting discussion in Q&A session. Our next panelist is the commander of National Defense University in Romania. He's going to talk about the modern military leadership and resilience. Brigadier PLETCAN experience includes positions of head of the International Relations section within the Land Forces staff, Chief of Staff in the Chief of Defense Office, and Deputy Chief of the Training and Doctrine Directorate. He was also deployed in Kosovo as commander of the Romanian detachment. He was part in the Romanian staff personnel deployed in ISAF HQ in Kabul, Afghanistan. He's a graduate of the Faculty of Command in National Defense University, the Faculty of Communication and Public Relations, the Advanced Security Studies program at George Marshall Center in Germany. He has a master's degree in National Security Strategy from the National War College of the National Defense University in Washington, D.C., United States. Brigadier PLETCAN, please proceed. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Eugen. And also I want to salute all the other panelists which are here, including Professor MARIANO. I'm proud to say that I was one of his students during his time and my time in the National War College back in Washington, D.C. And frankly, I recognized some of the aspects that he used to teach back there. Mr. Dubois, also nice to see you, Dirk. And General Ghiță BÂRSAN, my former colleague in the military high school. Good morning. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really proud to be in this position of high responsibility, commanding the Romanian National Defense University. I will do my best to cope with the challenges posed by this subject in terms of educating the future leaders. So leading, I will say that is always a challenge. Leading during crisis, I think it's an art. And how should we educate the future military and civilian leaders to cope with the responsibility of leading military forces of masses of population during the conflict? That's a question that I will try to answer during the next slides. If I can have the next one, please. The next slide, please. Okay, so I will address the questions approaching the subjects proposed on the agenda. And I'm relying on that, on my experience, combined with what I have learned since I took command of the Romanian NDU, which is a high-level education institution tasked to educate both civilian and military leaders. Next slide, please. I would start from what I consider to be the minimum required characteristics of a leader. And no matter if we talk about a general or a state secretary, each of them have to make decisions or to advise a higher decision maker. From my personal perspective, considering the history, a leader needs to anticipate possible developments in his field of expertise. Just to mention a few great leaders: George Frost Cannon for his contribution to the Marshall Plan, Winston Churchill for his outstanding leadership during wartime, General Hermann Norman Schwarzkopf for his outstanding leadership during the Operation Desert Storm, and so on. Each of them had vision, were able to assume risks, and seized the initiative whenever opportunities arise. Critical thinking and diplomacy, correctly applied, made them successful. The future leaders need to be educated on how to understand and interpret the future by knowing and understanding the past. Understand the culture of the respective possible opponent, understand its history, understand the domestic context and international ambitions of that possible future opponent. Emotional intelligence offers the leader the capacity to perceive a possible threat by assessing exactly or as exactly as possible the changes in real time. The risk-taking is a day-to-day job for decision makers, and hesitation is not always productive. An innovative leader will find solutions to the most complicated problems and is a source of inspiration for his subordinates. For that, he needs to be bold and creative. So how should we educate that type of leader? Next slide, please. One of the researchers at the Romanian National Defense University, Colonel Petrescu, came up with this possible definition of military resilience. I started from there, identifying each stage of resilience and what our efforts as educators, should consist of. But again, military resilience is part of the national resilience. So the nation has to build capacities and capabilities, and military resilience is just a part of that. Next slide, please. The identified phases within the military resilience are absorbing the shock. Sometimes the leaders are paralyzed by some unpredicted actions of different actors. It was the situation of illegal annexation of Crimea, when the international community was shocked by the actions of the so-called Green Men. It took them a lot of time to absorb that. The same with the COVID-19 pandemic. It took some time for the leaders around the world to start drafting feasible courses of action. For this reason, I consider that in the first phase of the crisis, the leaders need to be prepared to absorb the shock very fast by educating them to be self-confident, to rely on their experience and their existing means of information, sensors, and sources. They need to trust the capabilities under their command and make informed decisions. In the second phase, resistance and counterattack are very important. We have all witnessed the aggressive anti-vaccination campaign developed by different actors meant to disengage population from their governments and ruin their authority. At this time, interagency cooperation is critical. Joint planning and execution, together with setting strategic objectives to be achieved, will make things happen. The leadership skills tested during this phase and weak leaders need to step down. Nevertheless, during peacetime, strategies to be applied during the second phase need to be agreed and planned for. Phase 3 means for education institutions an adaptation of the curricula and redefine the missions. During crisis, outstanding leaders arise, and their example is to be followed. Listening and adapting are the main activities that the education have to do during this phase. Next slide, please. I was invited and I was able to participate at the NATO Conference of Commandants organized by the NATO Defense College with the support of Royal Danish Defense College in Copenhagen, Denmark. One of the briefers was Francesca Borgonovi, who came up with this slide, and I liked it so much, so I included it in mine. But again, quoting the source, which is very important. These were the questions that the distinguished briefer at the Commandant's Conference wrote on the slide. So what will be the roles or the role of the teachers? Professor MARIANO might have known it before, but I've heard it for the first time in Copenhagen. Sage on the stage or guide on the side? Sage on the stage means that I'm the professor, I'm coming into the classroom, and this is the solution, and you have to accept it, and that's it. Guide on the side means that I'm provoking you to think with your own head, means that you have to read some articles, bibliography, books, and you have to come to the classroom and discuss, and I will guide your discussion. The role of schools and education, transmission versus transformation. We are not here just to transmit informations. We are here to transform the students, to give them the necessary knowledge through, as I said, discussions, and let them think with their own head. transform them into the future leaders that we want them to be. The learning is no longer teacher-centered, is rather student-centered. That means I have to listen to the student, I have to let him put his thoughts on the paper, and he doesn't have to write down the same things that I've told him letter by letter. So I don't need him to reproduce what I said. And so on. All these questions are questions that we, the educators, we are supposed to answer and make things happen better. Next slide, please. The Romanian National Defense University offer the programs listed on the slide. And most of those programs, we are in the process of modernizing each and every one of them, starting from the bachelor degree programs up to the PhD studies. The focus of our efforts in the NDU are related, of course, to security and defense, scientific research, so on and so forth. Very soon we will be able to come up with new programs in terms of a new course for strategy or a new master degree for cyber defense. But that is going to happen probably in the first half of the next year. Next slide, please. Instead of conclusions, I wanted to come up with this slide talking about the way ahead, at least from my perspective. As Professor MARIANO already said, we have to keep up with the continuous technological advance. We will not be replaced by artificial intelligence, but we have to learn how to work with artificial intelligence. And of course, the decisions will be made by human, but in the future, action will be performed by artificial intelligence. We need to develop critical thinking skills, and that is a requirement for anyone that wants even to be considered a leader at lower level. That is not my phone. The military education institutions need to educate and provide the future leaders with the necessary skills to face both predictable and unpredictable events. Through continuous interagency training and education, education means the courses that NDU offer, and the training are the exercises that General MAVRITT with his training and Doctrine division is putting together at the interagency level. And they need to understand better each other's side role and function. While military mindset might seem rigid for the civilians, and the civilians' mindset might seem unacceptable for the military, the common education and training will bring them together and find a solution to each type of crisis. Again, the future leaders will have to have initiative, able to assume risks, and to possess vision and capacity to anticipate things. Next slide, please. With this, I will conclude my short presentation. I'm looking forward for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brigadier General PLETCAN. Thank you very much. I will keep in my mind what you mentioned, that the role of the education is to prepare the students for worst scenario, for worst case scenario. And also it is important for military institutions not be only a tool for transmission, as you mentioned, is to give more, to build minds. Thank you very much, and we hope to find out more in Q&A session. Thank you very much. Our next panelist is an expert in the security education field. He is going to give us several insights regarding the nature of transnational threats related to education and the effects of education for the stability of the security environment. Mr. Dirk Dubois, Head European Security and Defense College, graduated the Belgian Military Academy with a master's degree in social and military science in 1985. In the first part of his career, he occupies several operational posts, including abroad and position as a staff officer. He was a training manager at the European Security and Defense College before joining the Director General for Education of the Belgian Ministry of Defense. On 1st April 2015, he was appointed as head of the European Security Defense College. In December 2017, the EU member states decided to prolong his mandate by consensus until 2022. Sir, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, and I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. First of all, let me thank you and the organizers from the Romanian Ministry of Defense for the invitation to participate in this panel, together with some people that I have come to greatly respect and even consider friends over the last couple of years. So it's really good to be here. Stephen, your comments on Star Wars and the clone army made me think of a quote from a science fiction book, and you know I'm a science fiction fan myself. The book was written by Ben Bova, and I think it was, if I recall, called Ringworld. And the quote is something like, all military training is aimed at making a robot out of you. Who else in his right mind would run towards somebody who is firing at him? And whenever I teach military students, I immediately add, I absolutely do not agree with that quote. Often, military thinkers have stated that it is wrong to prepare the previous war. Most generals try to do that. For the people who train future military commanders, I would say that it's even wrong for us to try to educate the people for the next war, especially in this very quickly evolving situation of the last couple of decades, and even more in the exponentially quickly evolving situation for the next generation. We need to go back to basics. We do not need officers that are capable of applying the current tactics, techniques, and procedures without hesitance. We have plenty of NCOs and soldiers to that for us. I think we need officers that master the art and science of war and are capable to think of new ways to implement them for us on the future battlefield. Stephen, we need those Jedis of you. Just before COVID, I had the pleasure to participate in two big events, two major events. One was the annual conference of commandants in Rome of NATO Defense College. By chance, it was in Rome. And the other one was the ASEAN Regional Forum, Head of Defense Universities, Colleges, Institutes meeting. In both those meetings, there was a focus on being afraid of the future. Presentation by Nick Gowing that started the opening of the Conference of Commandants, for me, literally raised a red flag. Well, he started by a completely red slide. And 1 month later in Singapore, we were discussing VUCA. While I agree that today's world is, up to a big extent, volatile, uncertain, contested, and ambiguous, is that something that we should teach our future military leaders? And then I come to what Dorin has explained. I have seen in my life too many disasters that were created out of fear and indecisiveness. So we need leaders that are capable and willing to take decisions, even in the fog of war. Well, obviously, I now work for the European Union, and I have worked with NATO in the past. But in the EU, contrary to NATO, military power is the least of the powers of instrument of the European Union. Still a significant factor in the power balance and should not be neglected. Military power is first and above all a tool by which you react to the outside world. It is a tool of diplomacy, if you want. It is therefore important that for a moment we look at the security environment of the EU. And unfortunately, I have to say that we are today surrounded by international actors who have first and above all their own national interests at mind rather than the interest around the world. And let us first look, and I'm not going to go into too much detail because that lecture will take me at least an hour to go into the details, but let us look at a couple of our allies first. The United States, Turkey. United States with its pivot to the Pacific, justified from their perspective, and recently their actions in Afghanistan and with the creation of AUKUS. It is clear that the United States acts out of its own interests. Turkey, realizing that it has almost no hope at all to ever join the European Union, now wants to become a major regional power with a big influence in the Islamic world. It acts once again out of its own interests. Looking at those who are maybe not so friendly, Mr. Putin in Russia, the recent crisis with Belarus, China, North Korea, and even non-state actors in international terrorism personified by Al-Qaeda and IS, all of those act out of their own interests. In such a world, the European Union and its member states has to stop being naive and to start to defend the EU interest. And where they coincide as much as the US does towards the European Union and its member states and to its other allies and partners, as long as your national interests coincide with the interest of your partner or do not clash with them, you cooperate. Not that the EU should do this to the detriment of NATO. You have not heard me say that. We shouldn't duplicate, but instead we should reinforce and be complementary to NATO to build in redundancy and thus to contribute to the resilience of the alliance and of its nations and member states. The European Union, however, has compared to its North American ally a far bigger challenge. The EU is not a nation state, and that's not a secret. We will likely not be one in the next couple of decades. We do not have a single general culture, nor do we have the single security and defense culture yet. As a result, we do not have a single way of educating and training our young officers or our senior officers. Just as an example, in my own country since the 19th century, pretty much as Stephen has explained for the US, we have always believed that an officer should be educated and have a university degree at what is currently master level. In other countries, it suffices to have a secondary school diploma or a bachelor diploma. In 2008, I was responsible for the initial stock-taking exercise on what would lead up to the European Initiative for the Exchange of Young Officers inspired by Erasmus. I even have to catch my breath when I pronounce the title. It's better known as Military Erasmus or Emilio. One of the driving ideas behind the initiative is what I defined at that time as human interoperability. The capability of a military staff member to work together with armed forces of another country thanks to a common understanding and shared education and training. We focused at the level of young officers at that time because contrary to the generation of Cold War officers myself included. We see more and more that junior officers from very small countries, especially, come into contact with an international environment and work together with other nations. To be efficient and effective without a long integration period, we are convinced that it is useful for a young officer to have part of the initial training done in an international format. At that time, we were 27 member states, not the same as we are today. And unsurprisingly, we found that there were at least 30 different, if not 60 different solutions to what basic officer education should look like. Our task wasn't even to try to define the optimal solution, but to find ways through which we could exchange students and teachers and mutually recognize the training that was done and the education that was done in another country. In 2009, I was then invited to work with NATO DEEP on the core curricula for professional military education at all the levels, starting from the basic officer education, staff officer, and advanced staff officer education. I only mention this because I used that work to benchmark one of our own, what we call lines of development for military Erasmus, common descriptors, basically a dictionary of learning outcomes in 8 different domains that an officer should master, from being a soldier, a weapon system operator, a leader, role model, a teacher, a learner, an international security expert and diplomat. That work was concluded in 2014, and when we then implemented it in the curricula of the common modules, short courses allowing to exchange military students and easily allowing mutual recognition of the training. Based on that work in 2016, the chairman of the military committee, the EU military committee, asked the college to develop a sectoral qualification framework for all the levels of the military officer, describing what an officer should know, should be able to do, and at what level of autonomy and responsibility. We finalized this work in 2020 and delivered, in fact, the dictionary of high-level learning outcomes that allows to define curricula that can be translated in national professional military education, but can also be used, and that was actually the original intent, to describe functions in an international environment and to make it possible that we find the best fit of the person with the job. In this way, we indirectly streamline professional military education in Europe and bring them slowly together. The system also allows to capture what Stephen has mentioned in his presentation. It also allows to capture this informal and non-formal qualifications that people accumulate during their career and to make it possible to describe that as well. Let me come to a last point. At the same time, the least technical and probably the most difficult one. How can education and training contribute to more common security and defense culture? Partially, one of the answers I already gave, it's by slowly aligning the professional military education in our member states. But it also is a little bit more, and especially it is a little bit more strategic. The task of creating a common security and defense policy, culture rather, not policy, was given to the ESDC since it was created in 2005. What is the definition of this elusive common security and defense culture? You can find several definitions on the internet, and actually the one that was used to create the college was written by the first chair of the ESDC Executive Academic Board, Dr. Nicolae. You can find it on the internet if you are interested. But personally, whenever I talk to my course participants, I explain it as an effort to try to convince somebody from the Baltic states that although Russia may be seen as a threat to them, that there are also interests and threats that are in the south, in Africa, or in the Middle East and North Africa. At the same time, explaining to our colleagues from the Iberian Peninsula that there are also interests to be defended in the East and in the Middle East, and that not all threats come from Africa, and that not all our interests are in Africa. We do that for the military, but we also do that for the civilians, and I think that is a quite important aspect. And I know that in many countries, in many nations, at the strategic level, this is also done. You bring together civilians and military. I think this is extremely important, that we also make certain that our political masters and their administrations understand the security environment and the defense environment in which they are living. Putting people together, putting civilians and military together is once again creating a kind of interoperability, creating this network that also Stephen has mentioned as being a big part of what we do in training and education. Often I see that civilians who come to our courses and sit together with military, the first 3-4 days are very apprehensive, even anxious, when they are sitting next to somebody in a uniform. And then after a couple of days, they start to realize that the military are actually simple people like themselves with a different profession, a very specific one, but a profession at that. With this, I conclude my intervention, and again, thank you for your attention and for inviting me to be part of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dubois. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to see that the youngers' education it's of paramount importance and is mentioned many times in our speeches. Also, you mentioned about slowly alignment education in our member states. I think it's really important to coordinate, to have the same approach in this field. And also, very important, as you mentioned, the administration to understand very well and very clear how the security environment is. Thank you very much, Dirk, for the very interesting insights. Okay, due to the fact that Mr. Dubois has another appointment in the next hour, I would like to break the rule just one time and to raise an issue for him. We realize that are many transnational threats to the education in the current security environment. How do you think that nature of conflict, being both ways, will be affected by the future education?
Well, I think, first of all, the nature of conflict for Europe, very specifically, will remain pretty much as it has been over the last 30 years. I do not think that there will be a major military war going on in Europe. I don't see that very likely, and this is only my personal opinion, and I have on purpose avoided to read the threat assessment done by the EU recently in the margins of the creation of the compass. The nature of conflict for the foreseeable future, I think, will remain pretty much hybrid, at least as far as the European continent is concerned. So you will continue very likely to see actions from our not so good friends towards our east to try to destabilize our societies through actions that were already described by one of the previous speakers. The military plays a role in that, but a marginal role, I would say. Most of those actions still fall within the remit of internal affairs, justice and home affairs, if you want to use the EU lingo. Military can contribute that, and certainly in terms of cyber security, cyber defense, because that's an important part of hybrid. On the stronger scale of military usage, pretty much also in the foreseeable future, at least for the European Union, I think most of the actions will remain of an expeditionary nature. We will very likely continue to conduct missions and operations, also military ones, be it non-executive, be it executive, in the regions in which the European Union has interests. So I think we should prepare our soldiers and our young officers to be extremely flexible and to have the capacity to, at the same time, participate in high-intensity conflicts if and when necessary. That is, in my opinion, still the core business of the military. But at the same time, I think we also need to prepare them to be able to work in an environment that is not the one that we are used to. So to do expeditionary things, either in Africa, in Asia, or wherever in the world that our political leaders send us. This requires an additional set of skills, which include things like being a diplomat, being able to talk with people at your own level. And I always take the example, I had the privilege of being a liaison officer with the UN in '97 in Croatia. And as a liaison officer, I was always talking with the people from the UN Civil Affairs, amongst others, also their legal department, and also with the local authorities at the level of mayor up to governor, and preparing our soldiers to be able to do that, to be able to discuss other things than their purely military vision. That is just as important these days as preparing them to do outright war. I hope this answers your question.
Thank you very much, Dirk. Thank you very much, and very, very interesting view, saying that marginal role for military. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for saving time to be with us, for joining us today, and for your contribution to our panel. Once again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll move forward. Our fourth member of the panel is the Romanian Land Forces Academy Commander. He has a long experience as professor and taught many generations of younger cadets. Brigadier General Ghiță BÂRSAN will let us know the challenges of education and training within Romanian Land Forces. He will touch also the leader's strategic thinking mindset and multi-domain training. Among his previous positions, we can include Deputy-Rector, Deputy Commander for Scientific Research, and Professor and Head of the Technical Science Department within the Land Force Academy. His scientific activity includes over 31 books, course supports, collection of problems, and over 126 scientific studies, articles, and papers published in scientific journals and conference proceedings. He is a graduate of the Military Technical Academy in 1989 and has PhD in engineering studies. General, the floor is yours.
Good morning to everyone. I'm waiting to share my presentation.
Something has happened that we can hear you very well. We can see the presentation, but we can't hear you.
Good morning to everyone.
Now it's working. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to thank you for inviting us to take part of this conference to share ideas about and trends about improving our Red Force education and training. So, in the next minutes, I will provide you some of the educational and training perspectives that can be used to improve the Romanian Land Forces operational readiness, as well as their leaders' abilities to grapple with future operational environment. To do so, I propose to you the following agenda. First, after a short introduction, stressing the importance of leaders' education and training for future operational context, I will go on with a possible conception of the Romanian Land Forces to develop their leader strategic thinking mindset. Next, I will present to you the strategy of multi-domain training for the Land Forces, where the accent will be on the training based on hybrid scenarios, facilitated by integrated and distributed simulation. This strategy of training can be used to challenge our different levels of leader mental agility. Last, I will cover the issue regarding the possible optimization of the Land Forces education and training using emerging and disruptive technologies, where the main focus will be on the artificial intelligence. For this point, I will analyze the artificial intelligence applicability for the operation process, especially visualizing the activities or planning and execution. To begin with, I would like to ask you the following question. Why does the military leaders' education and training matter? In this regard, in any organizational context, there must be a strong correlation between the organization itself and its leadership. If a leadership is applied to make dynamic decisions and design a common, actionable direction for all its members, the organization must ensure different strategies for monitoring and assessing situations, as well as providing the necessary support for decision-making. In this context, the leader is central because he is one of the who must monitor and consequently assume responsibility for all decision points encountered. Focus on the Land Forces context, I can say that in any operational environment, having produced volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous patterns, the Land Forces structure in general and their leaders in particular, faced with operational challenges triggered by the questions emphasized on this slide. As you can see, all these questions are connected and related to the last one. During the presentation, I will try to give an answer from the Land Forces perspective. As I presented in the agenda, first discussion point stresses the issue of possible strategy used to develop the strategic thinking mindset for Land Forces leaders. For my side, this represents the first step in trying to adapt the education and trying to ever-changing operational environment. Furthermore, I can say that VUCA variables generate a strong impact on the Land Forces leaders when they have to face with the exceeding decision-making points. As you can see on the right side on the slide, some strategies for gaining organizational flexibility should start with building independent thinkers and end with promoting concise directions. The principles underlying the education of leader strategic mindset are highlighted on this slide. I believe that a leader with a strategic mind, no matter his level, will be much more capable to overcome obstacles that can be encountered at lower levels. Speaking about substantiation aspects, the model of change for Figure 1 emphasizes that in some situations, adaptation is not enough and needs to be supported by innovation and agility. in order to maintain the advantage of unfamiliar situation. Moreover, for our vision, the design of leaders model for building strategic thinking should include practice, discipline, and reflection. As you can see from figure 2, the core of strategic thinking model is vision, which correlates other elements that shapes leaders' strategic thinking, such as mental flexibility, intellectual curiosity, creativity, intuition, analysis, system thinking, information gathering, and so on.
John, very sorry to interrupt you. We'd like to ask you to move the slides or from technical side to take this. Thank you very much. Sorry, I hate to interrupt you.
We don't see my slides?
We see only one slide, all the participants. The first one. Thank you. Sorry.
It's better now, or what's happened?
It seems that it's working now. Thank you very much. We are on the 6th slide.
I don't know what's happened, so...
No problem. Thank you.
So I'll continue. In this case, I'll continue with...
Please continue. Please continue.
I'll continue with slide 5. Yes, because it's important in my presentation. The principle underlines the education of leader strategic mindset are highlighted on this slide. I believe that a leader with a strategic mind, no matter his level, will be much more capable to overcome obstacles. I told you before that in our vision, the design of leaders model for building strategic thinking should include practice, discipline, and reflection. And you can see in the figure 2, the core of strategic thinking model. I told you before that are, in our opinion, mental flexibility, intellectual curiosity, creativity, intuition, analysis, and so on. Going on the leader strategic mindset must be promoted in all land forces levels. More specifically, using NATO model, a strategic mindset assumes a joint, interagency, intergovernmental, and multinational approach. G, to cope with the most uncommon challenges specific to the current and future environment. For a better understanding of gene domains, some theoretical clarifications are emphasized on the left side of the slide. Practically, this approach suggests that the level of the employed military structure, the usage of the high degree of capabilities, these diversifications require from the leader's side the ability to think strategically in order to influence in a positive fashion the operational performance of military forces and implicitly the success of operation. Also, as it is highlighted in the table of the slide, positive manifestation of strategic mindset implies a set of requirements on building and developing specific knowledge, skills, and abilities. Analyzing information for this table, it can be stated that the most important decision requirements in accordance with each domain are, for joint domain, understanding truly the organization itself and its specific processes correlated with figuring out other services capabilities like culture and processes. For interagency domain, leaders must be able to understand capabilities, processes, and culture belonging to other governmental agencies. Speaking about intergovernmental domains, besides the necessity to understand statutory, regulatory, and policy environment for security national territory, building and maintaining personal relations has the same importance. And for the last domain, the multinational one, leaders must be able to envisions their ability to lead multinational teams, having sufficient knowledge about friendly nations, as well regarding their capabilities and culture. As I said previously, that the desire to build strategic thinking at lower levels should involve practice, discipline, and reflection. Consequently, a method that should be widely used in the land forces to challenge their leaders' agility focuses on multi-domain training using dedicated hypothetical scenarios. This training approach, which is based on GM principles, involves all specific components of operational environment, including civilian sector. Another constant of the land forces training scenarios consists in the fact that the friendly forces courses of action, as well as adversary courses of action, should have a hybrid character. What does this mean? For the group part, hybrid course of action means that the land forces structure operate in conjunction with special forces and other required capabilities to cover not only the conventional for adversary course of action, but also the unconventional one. Instead, for the red part, there are used three variants of adversary course of action as follows: conventional accentuated or unconventional, moderately conventional or moderately unconventional, and last one is conventional diminished and unconventional accentuated. Also, the design of these variants of adversary course of action should include other target of audiences such as hostile indigenous population, local regional security forces with red agenda, and so forth. Practically, in this manner, planners generate the required VUCA mark that is present in the real operation environment. In such ambiguity, we will have the possibility to challenge the ability of our land forces leader to make decisions based on testing their agility and experience. The simulation architecture used to play all these hypothetical scenarios is highlighted on this slide. As you know, Romanian Army has a national simulation network whose core is the Joint National Training Center from Cimpu. The GNTC has integrated and distributed simulation capabilities. As we know, it was used many times in different NATO exercises. Regarding the Land Forces Academy dedicated capabilities, there is a modeling and simulation office hosting VPS4 and JKS terminals. We are currently working to interconnect our simulation capabilities with GNTS site. Now there's one significant challenge that impacts all societies' domain is the ability to design, develop, and use emerging and disruptive technologies. Also at this moment, each nation, either independently or in a collective manner, makes major events and efforts to develop and acquire the ATDC in order to gain and maintain advantage of different competitors. In the same way, NATO, through its dedicated science and technology organization, develops different projects with EADT purpose. As you can see on the slide, in this figure, I highlighted the EADT which are in NATO's lands, having a time horizon of 2040. Even if all NATO EADTs are very important, the follow-up analysis will be focused on possibility to use artificial intelligence for training and operational purpose. In this regard, for the personal researchers conducted so far in the field of the land forces, the general framework of artificial intelligence's applicability in the operational process. Therefore, the desideratum of optimizing the training using artificial intelligence capabilities can be limited to approaching each piece of the puzzle highlighted on this slide, imprinting especially the activities of planning and execution and implicitly specific decision making. To avoid misunderstandings, artificial intelligence capabilities will not replace the commander during the progress of operation process, but will support him through counseling activities so as to maximize the probability of performing the action triggered by his decision. On the other hand, within the whole spectrum of activities, the essence of using artificial intelligence will be materialized in the quality of commander for driving the operations process. For his reason, the most target element for optimization will be the commander's intel. The same manner related to headquarters and artificial intelligence relationship, the last one will support its organic elements like S2, S3, and so on, to assist commander through the operation process. Considering the principle dedicated to operation process, such as driving the operation process, building, maintaining situational understanding, and applying critical and creative thinking, in the figure from the left side, I highlighted some of the possible artificial intelligence contribution in supporting land forces commander and staff during the progress of training and military operation. The most targeted elements will be of artificial intelligence optimization will be, in our opinion, understanding the situation involves the enhancement of creating the common operational picture, implementing commander's decision and exercises the control over the operation through optimization the tactical operation center activities. Assessing the progress of the operation involves the improvements of measure of performance and measure of effectiveness. On the other hand, even if most decisions are made during the execution, they are also the subject of the operation planning. In this regard, also the commander's influences all MDMP tasks through his conceptual planning. It can be seen from the decisions with the greatest impact of planning and related to intelligence preparation on the battlefield and approval of the friendly forces course of action. For the IDP situation, artificial intelligence will be able to advise the commander so that he is aware and all relevant aspects characteristic to the enemy when adopting his probable course of actions. Instead, for the second situation, artificial intelligence will be able not to propose the commander that course of action will be the highest probability of success, but also to make him aware to the necessity for integrating within selected course of action the probable action of the other interest audiences, such as indigenous population, local authorities, and other parties that may influence the operation. Certainly, the execution will be the most advanced in the case of using artificial capabilities. Thus, the artificial intelligence will influence in a positive way commander decisions and implicitly the headquarters activities, as well as the actions of subordinate forces. The context of integrated artificial intelligence in the execution is shown in this figure, where the key element in attaining the end of state is the adjustment decision. In this context, the use of artificial intelligence will increase commander's mental agility on the other hand, and on the other hand, it will supplement the decisional expertise and the level of his emotional intelligence. Other secondary effects of optimizing adjustment decisions based on the artificial intelligence can be linked with decisional speed and accuracy, which are important requirements of the operational flexibility. Also, this principle can be applied at the level of subordinate commanders if the artificial intelligence applications are available, of course, the counseling purposes. In this case, artificial intelligence must be integrated in the command post architecture. For instance, in a tactical operation context, assuming a battalion in charge with execution, beside the battalion commander who is responsible for adjusting the execution in accordance with anticipated threats and opportunities, the artificial intelligence will be also beneficial for company and platoon commanders to support them in applying the adjustment decision made by battalion commander. Moreover, taking into consideration the complexity and ambiguous mark of the current and future operational environment, each commander at any level will be the subject of making decisions under unknown circumstances, meaning the ability to adopt the adjustment decision. Taking into consideration the viewpoints highlighted, it becomes easily understandable that all level leaders from the land forces, no matter their ranks and responsibilities, will experience VUCA challenges in approaching future operational environments. We are obligated to design appropriate educational and training strategies whose application will fuel the abilities of the land forces leader, making them capable to understand and react VUCA patterns, shape targeted audiences, counter operational threats, and exploit different opportunities. Certainly, the judgment that each of us must assume have to do with the objective assessment of the current status of the land forces education and training on the one hand, and on the other hand, with identifying the immediate educational and training priorities for boosting the land forces readiness necessary to face with ever-changing operational environments. This concludes my presentation, and I will take any questions from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, General. Thank you very much for your comprehensive presentation. I wrote down from your presentation the following phrase, the following statement. Strategic thinking at low level. It is really important. As we say in the military, small action could have strategic impact. I think that is thinking, this strategic thinking at low level is a way to increase the performance in the military. Thank you very much. And also speaking about multi-domain operation or all domain operations is a trigger or could be a trigger for multi-domain training, which in the future or right now is a challenge. Is a challenge for our education system to stay in line with the operational environment and to provide training and education for multi-domain or all domain operation. Thank you very much, General. Very interesting presentation. We will move to our fifth member of our panel, Professor Jaroslaw GRYZ, Deputy-Rector for Students Affairs, War Studies University in Poland. He will help us to find the answer to the following question. How does education help to shape security culture? Professor Jaroslaw GRYZ has been Deputy Rector for Students Affairs at the War Studies University since 2016. Previously, he was member of the working panels, the Science for Peace and Security Program, NATO 2018, and Strategic Security Review done by Ministry of Defense of the Republic of Poland, also in 2016. He has been professor at War Studies University Since 2016, he is graduate of the Political Sciences faculty within the Adam Mickiewicz University, 1991, has a master's degree in political history and education from the Political Sciences faculty within the Warsaw University, and he has a PhD in international relations at the Warsaw University in 1997. Sir, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Please let me first load my presentation and let me know if you see the presentation itself.
You can share with us. It happened.
Do you see the presentation? Please confirm.
Yes, we can see.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, first let me give some hints according to my presentation, because I will cover the area of education as the main vector of the promoting security culture. And firstly, what I would like to raise out the areas and the concept of domain of security culture, something what shaped the security culture and the impact which is given to that, and the role of the World Studies University in the promoting security culture. We well know that the education of security culture is a very broad term. It refers back to the 70s, but in fact, it refers to the security culture wherever we are looking back in the past in the humanity and the history of the humanity. So we cannot say that we are so novel and we are speaking about something what we find out, or we refers to something what was founded or described in the 70s of 20th century. Anyway, I would like to start with the presentation and explaining the concept of security culture, one of the, well, I would say, approach to the security culture and what does it bring to us, how we are going into the model of educational activities and how we are forming the values and the attitudes toward the security within the students and within the education programs. And finally, I would like to broaden the scope of what we are doing here in the World Studies University and what we are focusing on. Like we received the 3 questions from the organizer. First, the aim is to examine the impact of promoting security culture, and we received the research questions according to that, which you may see here, and which can be involved and which can be explained during my presentation. Firstly, what factor influences the formation of security culture? We think that we are basing on the 3 domains, let's say so, or three pillars. The first one is the mentor spiritual dimension, and that refers to the individual dimension of anyone who is attending to our university and who is being adhered to the different forms of programs we are delivering to our students. The second element is the organizational legal dimension and the social dimension. That is something what has been created within the society and within the educational process in Poland. And the third one is the mental dimension, which refers to the first 2 and which is giving, let's say, total assumption what is being created within the security culture. What is the strategic culture? Like I told in a moment ago, we refer to the 70s and to formula of what the strategic culture brings. First is an integrated set of symbols, any kind of symbols that you are using and we are creating to name or rename the values which we are recognizing as the most relevant for us, and which, in fact, then after are creating the dominant strategic approach, preferences. And due to that, the role of the armed forces and the interstate political relations. What is also an assumption given by the Jack Snyder is the sum of ideas, emotionally conditioned responses, and form patterns of customary behaviors. That is also, I would say, a very broad approach which gives us, let's say, a mindset for thinking what does the strategic culture brings to us. I would say that here is one of the most simplest formulas which can be used for explaining what is the strategic culture, is the that refers to the United States approach. That is, let me translate it from Polish into English in a moment. That is the art and the science to achieve the goals. And I assume that that is the one of the simplest formula. What does the strategic culture brings and what does it refers to? Anyway, the strategic culture could be, I would say, elaborated in different ways. And in any of them, what is the most important, we can find the values and the attitudes. That is a formula given by one of our Polish, let's say, scientists who deals with the strategic culture, Marian Cieślarczyk. And he follows that kind of explanation, the values, the attitudes, the rules and regulations. Then, as an outcome, the behaviors and the norms. That is something which follows a kind of, let's say, formulating what is the characteristic of the given community, how this characteristic is influencing the pattern of thinking and evaluating what is going on in the different spheres, different areas. I would say that if you are going into the details, you can find out also different explanations, and those explanations are driven from even the latest history, as we can take a look here at the definitions of Piwowarski and Zaplatyński. And that is something what was created just after the Russian-Ukrainian war broke out. They named this culture as the entirely of the establishment material and non-material achievements of mankind, serving military and non-military. That is serving the broadly understood autonomous defense of specific individual and group entities. I would say that this is one of the elements shaping the strategic culture as such, due to the fact that, referring to the different attitudes, we can find out some elements which are constantly shaping that understanding. Firstly, the values. The values which are the universalism, which refers to the tolerance, to the protection of needs of the others, the care for the nation, for the nature, the sense for justice, the sense for peace, I would say broad understanding what are the human values. Benevolence, which is referred to the loyalty as the preservation of enhancement, welfare, something what we can refer to the individual, to the family, to the friends. The third element is the tradition, which being brought to the youngsters and which are being involving the oldest one in the shaping their pastors and their behaviors and their forms of acting. Then after conformity, which is the adjustment of behavior to social norms and the expectations of the other, as well as the self-restraint. Then after the security, despite the fact, however, we recognize the security, it mainly refers to the social stability, to the forms of the social harmony, to the individual forms of personal safety, and the power, something what is coming out from the described values, and which is referred to social power, which is referred to the creating of the mental power, and which refers to the creating of the specific attitude of the communities. Then after, we can take a look at the factors which influence the security and culture. I will not go into detail on speaking about all of them, but what is important, this security culture constitutes, is the firstly security awareness. And here it was an element referred in the previous slide, which referred to the tradition. Like Alistair Young-Johnson described in the past, and that is something what refers to how we recognize the present and future time, referring to what already was done in the past and how we recognize the past and how it influenced on our way of thinking. And I would say that due to that, the security awareness is compared to what is going on the new days and how everything is going to be transformed from the one hand, and from the other, there are some principles which we are referring at, which we are using to recreate our mindset, but still adhere to the certain forms or patterns of way of thinking. Then the security compliance as an element which also creates important factor for our way of thinking, and the security execution. The last element is very important because it describes what are in fact norms which are being transferred from this culture or the security culture into the real life, and how those norms are imposing the behavior in the, let's say, normal social life, but what is foremost and the most important, how it refers to the soldiers, to their way of activeness, to they behave in the certain conditions which already been taught in the previous by the previous speakers. How does it influences and how the education impact the promotion of security culture within our War Studies University? We are quite young university, referring to the past from 2016 to now. We have been transformed from the National Defense Academy into the new element, new War Studies University. Why? The easiest answer is because we wanted to refer to the patterns of thinking which have been in the interwar period, and we started to elaborate them and to bring them into the new formula of, let's say, thinking, education, and creating, let's say, the attitudes to everything what is the security consisted from. So that is the explanation. In fact, the security culture, which have been, let's say, the element for transforming our university into the new one. And what is the security culture and how it serves? Firstly, the exercise of effective control over emerging threats. Regain the security in a situation where it's having lost. The optimize for a specific entity and stimulate the beliefs which are important for the self-improvement and the other forms. How the education can help to promote security culture. Firstly, it refers to the teaching attitudes, and those attitudes which are creating, I would say, from one hand, the values used in the normal way, in the normal, let's say, behave, but also which creates a specific attitude, how to use all kinds of elements for shaping the responsibility and choosing of the different patterns of actions. So security education in the context of our university creates different elements from forming an individual life abilities to creating for awareness what is important as an element for preparation for work and the future activeness. Firstly, foremost, the most important is how to acquiring the knowledge, how to broaden the knowledge, and how to find out what is, let's say, true, and what in the specific way should be handled as an option for recognizing the existence. So in that context, we are referring to the interdisciplinary dimension of security education in all kinds of studies we are having here in our university. We have 11 forms of studies which we are promoting and which we are engaging our students. And that is what we can find here. That is the military security, political security, psychological security, public security, and environmental safety. In all of them, we can find out what creates and what combines the science and what creates this attitude for the art of strategy. In fact, there are a lot of problems despite of the areas I brought here, how to handle in the proper way and how to create a scope of knowledge which will be the most relevant for the certain time and certain attitude. How to provide in the practice way the knowledge to the students despite their, let's say, age and despite their, let's say, knowledge and the background. How we are creating this strategic culture. Firstly, we are breathing our concept of culture, and we are reading our concept of education from the normative documents and from the outline of them in the different forms. The most important for us is the Constitution Republic of Poland, and here is the Article 5 of Constitution, which says that armed forces are for protection and for defense of the Poland as a state, people, territory, and other elements which the Poland consists from. Then from the constitutions comes the outlines adopted into national security strategy. And from this national security strategy, we also have something what is very important and which in the very practical sense says what we have to do and how we should act. That is Political and Strategic Defense Directive, signed by the President of the Republic of Poland. And from that directive also comes out the tenets from the General Staff of the Polish Armed Forces. Those three elements we are in the cognitive way adopting in our, let's say, educational process. And we are following them and introducing into the practice and into the, let's say, educational programs. What we are doing in practice: educating command and staff personnel and educating civilian personnel. And we have two forms of studies, and they are focusing on different students. In fact, we are also combining them today, together, but we have also this strictly, I would say, division among them. That is the military education, and that is the civilian education. The civilian education is very easy to describe because we have and we follow the undergraduate and graduate students, the higher defense courses which are designated for the specific administration representatives, postgraduate studies, doctoral studies, MBA as well. And we have a specific form of education for the military students. And who are they? First, I would say the lowest level studies are for the junior officers. That is something what gives them the career path. We are not focusing on education of young officers who are just going into the army. That is not our role. We are implementing them into the new roles according to their promotion into the higher ranks. And due to that, we are creating different forms of studies which they have to pass, and they have to obtain a kind of, let's say, validation of their knowledge for being promoted into the higher post, higher ranks. From that perspective, we are creating the knowledge for the captains and up to the generals, because we are also following in our university the studies designated especially for the colonels, and those who are passing the studies are on the list designated for the Minister of Defense, from whom he may choose the person he would like to promote for the post of the general. So I would say that firstly, we are creating the knowledge and foundation for the state and defense security. We are also having the personnel of public administration. We are creating that kind of knowledge for any kind of the specific administration personnel throughout Poland, which have to be given to them from one hand, that is obligatory, but for them, they have to pass that formula of studies, mostly the kind of courses, which allows them to fulfill their posts. That is very important because it's according to the rule which we have in Poland, and which is obligatory for all the personnel in Poland, despite the fact whether he is in the, let's say, some local, let's say, community, or he is a local community leader, he is in the province leader, or whether he is a minister or he is a parliamentarian. Doesn't matter, he has to pass that formula of courses. Mainly they last for 1.5 weeks till 2 weeks. And then after he is, let's say, not appointed, but he is approved for being introduced into different forms of security dimension they are coping with. They cope with in the real life. We have the education studies and courses from captain to general. education, which is the first and the second degree for the civilian studies, long circle master studies, postgraduate studies, and master business administration as well, and the higher defense courses, which are specially designated for the civilians who are dealing with the security issues and military defense issues as well. Mr. Chairman, gentlemen, ladies, thank you for your attention. And now I would like to go back to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor. You gave us a comprehensive answer to the question how the education can help the promotion of security culture. And I wrote down teaching, creating, forming important ways to reach this goal. Once again, thank you very much. I'd like to open the Q&A session. Is the right time, and I have choose just few questions from our audience. First of all, for Mr. MARIANO, Stefan, could you mention for us a few ways in which formal education in the military field could support the spread of the security culture in the civilian area? It's one of the questions. Stefan, if you'd like to answer. I think it's connection between military field and civilian field.
Yes, thank you. Great question. So I think there's two ways that come to mind, maybe three. The first is at the experience that General PLETCAN and I share at the National War College. For example, there's approximately 1/3 of the course members there, of the students in that model, are civilians. They come from the Department of State, they come from civilians in the Department of Defense, or from the intelligence community, or our development agencies, or other government agencies. So that's one way, is to make sure that your professional military education institutions are open to civilians, as we are here at the NATO Defense College. So that's one. Two is to make sure that the officers that I think, for example, Professor GRYZ just talked about in that model, make sure that the officers get out of their military academy stovepipe, let's say. I was very fortunate that for my War College fellowship, I went to Queen's University in Canada. I think that was mentioned in my bio. So I did a civilian school for my undergraduate. I did a naval postgraduate master's degree, but then for my my War College fellowship, I was at a civilian institution. So a second way is by ensuring that there's a pipeline or a path for officers to rise up in senior ranks and have exposure to civilians in that way. And the third is to have civilian professors at the military universities and military academies. When I arrived at our military academy at West Point, 75% of the teachers there were in uniform, and they've tried to change that balance to have more civilian exposure to the cadets. And I think that model obtains even as we go up in our PME institutions. So there's just a couple of ways to increase the civilian aspects of formal education. Hopefully that's helpful. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Stefan, for your answer. The second question goes to Brigadier PLETCAN. What are, in your opinion, the main ways and methods to educate the future military and civilian leaders in order to be able to lead a resilient system? It's linked to resiliation. Please, General.
Okay, thank you for the question. If it would be to sum up, we are all familiar with the triad crawl, walk, run. I would say shape, guide, and then team up. Shape in the first phase, we have to shape personalities. In a continuum of education, each education institution has to do its own job. So in the first, at the first level of professional military education, I would shape the personalities to understand the basics of what means to be part of an armed system. In the second phase, I would guide them through what Professor Mariano said a few minutes ago, self-development together with formal education. This is when the students should attend master degree, when they are supposed to attend the courses that we have at the NDU, joint planning, leadership, strategic leadership course, and so on. That means is the second phase of the development where I am supposed to guide them in order to understand what resilience is and what is his role within the national resilience. And the third one, again, I will refer to my professor. Sorry about that, Stephen. Team up. We need to form relationships. And this is what we are doing at the National Defense College, where we have students, as Professor Mariano said, civilians and military. You know very well, Eugen, you've been one of the students here. So
when I was young.
Colonels to become generals, state secretaries to become ministers, and ambassadors, and so on. So basically, we have all the ministries together with military, and they manage to understand what strategy is all about, how to use the instruments of power, and they manage to form relationships, and they team up. That is, I think, the third way, and the way we can lead leaders. Basically, I remember when I was in Washington, D.C., Stephen, we have been given a book, Leaders Leading Leaders, right? And we were supposed to read it and give a feedback at the classroom and say, hey, you're a leader. How do you feel leading other leaders? You know, so basically this is what we are doing at the National Defense College through those 3 courses that we have together for like 6 months, one of them 3 months and a half, another one, and finally 3 months for juniors, junior positions inside ministries. Thing is, if we want to be resilient, we have to work at mentalities, personalities, we need to read, and then we need to team up with people from other ministries. And this is the key to a good resilience, from my perspective. Again, it's a personal opinion. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Jaroslaw. We hope that your students to understand very well what is this way. Okay, the last questions for Professor GRYZ. It seems to be easier, but I think it's very profound. How do you see the relation between security values and our modern life? Are the young generation is interested in the security values and security culture? We cannot hear you. Please.
Yes. Okay. We are in Poland dealing with a very specific model of education. What do I mean? In the schools, we have so-called profile classes. And those profile classes refers to the certain domains of the security of the state. The military, the internal, and that gives knowledge for those young people how the state is acting, how does the state is dealing with the security. They have different forms of the activities because it is done in the term that they should be educated. But by the way, that is the foremost, they should find it interesting, and that should be something relevant for them. So if they are going to the profile of the military class, they are in the Vini city where they are going to school, having study trips to the military facilities. They have the military units which are constantly cooperating with them and being a kind of patron for those classes. So any of them has it, let's say, patron from the military corps. That formulates a kind of activities which the young peoples are dealing with and which are delivered to them through the system. When then after we receive the young people who are attending to our university, they mostly knows what they would like to do. Go to the administration dealing with the security. Go then after the studies to the specific formula of other form of activeness of the state. We are not providing the recruits. That is not our role, and we are not doing that. But we are formulating the staff for the military and non-military activeness in the institutions, which is referred to the security, crisis management, whatever. Due to that, we have cooperation with the different ministries here in Poland, and we also giving to our students opportunity to enhance their knowledge and scope of interest. Each year, we are also creating something what is named by us as a job market. And from the different institutions, all from all over the governmental institutions, we have the representatives who are recruiting our students for their future jobs. So that is how we correlating the education process with formulating a kind of, let's say, attitude, and from the very, let's say, young level, that is from the children in the age of 11, 12 years.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay. We are close to the end of our session. Dear panelists, Mr. Stefan Mariano, Professor Jaroslaw GRYZ, General BÂRSAN, General PLETCAN, thank you very much for your support and for your presentations and for your answers. Thank you very much for the audience, for our followers. On behalf of the organizers of this event, we extend to you a warm thank you for participating in the panel that explored the education as vector for understanding and promoting the security culture here at the Romanian Military Thinking Journals Conference 2021. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for nice day.
Thank you very much, Eugen. Stephen, was great to see you again. All the best.
Thank you. All the best to you.
Goodbye.
You too. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your day and a good weekend. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.